I don't necessarily want to go in and build broadband service to somebody where they have access right across the street already. I'd rather build it where people don't have access, charge them a fair price. I'm very transparent to people about what my costs are. I say, listen, it cost me $7.50 a foot to do the construction. And that's just in the labor. That doesn't count the materials. And this year, the materials have been going up in cost about 5% every month.
Hey, fiber-minded people, you just heard Jared Mauch speaking. Jared had a problem in that he didn't get the broadband access he needed, and the big dogs like the Comcast and AT&T weren't able to offer any significant speed increases. So like a proper engineer, he took it upon himself to actually bring fiber to his home, and so brought fiber to his neighbors and to his community. And in this episode of the Become Fiberminded podcast, we're going to discuss with him what the process was like, what kind of investments he needed upfront, and how he's now trying to scale this business to different regions as well, while still working in his day job as a network engineer at Akami. So without further ado, let's head into the interview. You are listening to Become Fiberminded, a podcast about fiber optics. Every 2 weeks, we are bringing you insightful conversations with industry experts so you can become fiber-minded as well and get the success you deserve. I'm your host, Christian Till, and you can follow me on fiberminded.com. Welcome to Become Fiber-minded. Welcome, Jared, to this episode of Become Fiber-minded.
Hello.
Glad you're on. You know, you're one of the reasons why I started this podcast.
Oh.
Yeah, I saw your original story on LLNOC and then also the article on Ars Technica. I was like, dang, this is someone I want to talk with. And the podcast is actually a very good excuse to chat with people.
Oh, well, thank you for having me here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're on. So for the audience who doesn't know you, could you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I've been one of those kids that has been doing computers and stuff since, as far back as I can remember. Some of my first experiences with technology were dialing up with an acoustic coupler TTY thing into a VAX and being able to play tic-tac-toe on it. So I've been connecting to remote computers and stuff since since I was in my parents' bedroom, like hooked up to the phone. You had to dial and then connect it and stuff. So I've been doing computer stuff for many, many years. Been working in the internet industry for about the past, a little bit more than 25 years. I started working at one of the regional NSFNet networks called CICnet in the mid-90s, right as a bunch of them were getting acquired by all the different and rolled up in all the different companies as the internet was starting to go more commercial. But I've been spending a lot of time doing that. Been working at dial-up, everything from dial-up ISPs to big carriers and CDNs.
Right. And now you started your own internet company and telephone company.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting situation I ended up in. I moved to my current house in 2002, and at the time, the company I worked for, they gave me a T1 line. Was one of the benefits. And so I had a T1 at my house. Actually, I had a T1 probably since 97, 98 at my house, the apartment and condo and different locations I lived. But that's what I had. And, 1.5 meg symmetric is, really great for 2002.
Right. But not today.
No, it's a bit more of a challenge today. Services expect a little bit more.
So you also work a lot from home?
Yeah, I've worked from home since 97 or so. So for me, the single biggest change of the pandemic and working from home is that my kids' summer break now is, went from being a few months in the summer to get through when we would go on holiday or something to be basically a year and a half of them home. So that was a big difference and a big challenge, to adapt to, because it used to be this short period of time you would survive. And now it's this long period, it was much longer period of time with a lot of uncertainty.
Right. So you have this tier one line, you work from home, you have your kids, and you were looking for other options to increase obviously this bandwidth, and nothing came up, right?
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of different, avenues I went and I researched. So I had internet access from a local wireless ISP. Eventually, I got the T1 line. I replaced that with the access from the wireless ISP. That got me about 50 meg symmetric, or 50 meg down or so. Maybe a little bit more, which really helped out. Because right as all the online, in 2009, 2010, you started to have more of the content going online for video and such. And so, the needs really kind of started to ramp up, and then you're starting to have a lot more, like WebEx. I mean, that predates Zoom, but you had a lot more of these, online experiences where people were it's starting to expect you to have the capability to go on video, or you to see the live video or screen shared, technical information for debugging.
And what was now the final trigger where you said, okay, I had my wireless connection, so that you actually took it up on yourself to actually pump up the numbers?
I mean, the big difference was that I had been encouraging my wireless ISP for a number of years to invest money in fiber and do all of these things. There's a part of me where I think many of us geeks dream of having fiber at our home, especially fiber that we control, and data center and colo and all of these things. But I also didn't want the headache of having to deal with that. So I was kind of hoping that somebody else would be able to do that for me, or somebody else would make the investment to do that. And so I spent a number of years trying to convince companies like Comcast or AT&T in my area that, hey, you really need to go and deliver me service. There is a market for it out here, and there is value in this, as well as talking to the wireless ISP. I know a lot about what's going on with my old wireless ISP. He and I are good friends, and I help him out when he goes on vacation, and he helps me out when I go on vacation. But just knowing some of the risk factors involved there, I wanted to extricate myself from some of those risks. I wanted to get out of those risk factors and really take a lot of the situation under my own control, because there is some uncertainty about the tower, that, some long-term uncertainty, because somebody owned the property ownership changed hands. And there's just a lot of local drama that's gone on with that, with the local permitting and building people. I wanted to make sure that if something were to change there, I had permanent internet access at my house.
Yeah, it's funny that the wireless service provider didn't go for it. I had 2 episodes ago, episode 5, I interviewed Ryan Coles from Surf Broadband, and they started out as a wireless service provider. And at some point, they were losing blocks after blocks in 1 week. So 200 customers in 1 week gone. Just everyone disappeared and then moved to different operator. And basically, the sole reason why they moved was that the new operator deployed fiber to everyone.
Yeah, and you see that in a lot of the communities. That's one of the big risks. And in the U.S. right now, there's a lot of talk about what's going to be in part of these broadband and stimulus programs and infrastructure investment. But a lot of those plans haven't become very concrete. I've been very active in this in the local community, so I actually know almost all the other small fiber providers in my county. I live in one of the larger, from a population perspective, one of the larger counties in Michigan. And I know basically everybody involved who's doing the small scale internet service things, with the exception of one of them. That I haven't found, and they were somewhat similar to me. They built something basically to serve their own need, whereas a couple of the other ones they've built fiber networks. So my wireless ISP, he's a hybrid wireless fiber network right now, but it's a challenge, and he sees the value in the fiber, in the long term perspective. You have less troubleshooting, fewer problems. And when the problems are there, it's very clear, because either the fiber is connected or it isn't. Whereas with wireless, you have a lot of other things that come into play, like lightning and things that can damage your equipment that are completely outside of your control.
And now if we are going from step by step, so basically I would imagine that it, at least from a European perspective, it takes a lot of permits and getting registered, and not everyone can become a telephone company. Could you just quickly walk us through the steps? So if I have a listener who wants to serve his own need in a different country or in a different area, what are the high-level steps?
Yeah, I mean, the high-level steps for me were actually relatively simple. It was, I spent a lot of time doing the research. I talked to people who had done it before and figured out what I needed to do. I picked a company name, registered my company with the state that I live in. And then I went and contacted a lawyer who specialized in the telecom paperwork filing for the state and paid them $1,000 to basically cut and paste my company name on some work they'd already done, sent it over to me to proofread, and filed it with the state. And then a couple weeks later, I showed up on the list of companies that is a licensed telecommunication carrier.
Oh.
There was a little bit of email back and forth, but that was pretty much it.
Crazy.
So for $50 to register the company and $1,000 to pay the lawyer to file the paperwork, that was it. All of a sudden, I'm now a telephone company.
Crazy how easy it is compared to Europe. Okay, now you have the telephone company, but obviously now it goes into the planning stages and build out. And how did you tackle this?
There were a lot of things. I talked with the local permitting authority people, figured things out. I spent a lot of time studying maps, looking at things on Google Earth. My local municipality has some online mapping, so you can see what the shape of the parcels are, like the property, who owns it, and stuff. And I went and I started off on my own research endeavor. I actually sent letters to everybody who was along the fiber route. I basically was like, all right, hey, if I'm building this, how many of you want to sign up for service? And trying to figure out that level of information, because I didn't need a lot of people to sign up to have the business case work out, but I needed enough people to sign up to make it worthwhile. And so far, I've got about 41 people who've trusted me to be their ISP, including the wireless ISP that I used to get access from. He now buys access from me.
Oh.
As well. So he has one fiber connection. I've got fiber to one of his small towers, and he also has a wireless link from my house right now as well on one of the new 60 gigahertz wireless systems.
Right. So the license-free spectrum. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned now 41 customers, and did you do any kind of planning? Did you use Google Earth to draw the lines, or you just build as you go? And
no, I use Google Earth. I also had to have somebody had to do official drawings of the parcels and stuff.
Okay.
And so to turn into the permit people, so we had to put in a proposed route. Mm-hmm. We went back and forth with them many times over what we were doing, because it's unusual for them to encounter a new company in the space. It's it tends to be many of existing companies or contractors doing work, and so in doing that work, I learned a lot about what they wanted. Went and figured out some of the things, got things sorted out with contractors who are going to do the construction, because I'm not going to go out and do it myself. I have a full-time day job, and they had a crew of 3 people who were out doing that work.
Was it just a local contractor you contacted, or what was your guidance to say, okay, guys, never done this before. I have this plan, come build for me. And then there's okay, cool.
I mean, I'm leaving out a few steps, because you have all the materials you have to buy as well.
Yes.
So I got set up with a distributor who sells the conduit that you use to go underground, and sells the fiber optic cable, sells the little enclosures you see on the side of the road, pedestals and the handholds, the little concrete boxes that get buried, and start buying all those things and talking to them about what the costs are and what you're going to be doing. And then one of them said, oh, you should talk to this contractor. And so I talked to them, and we negotiated a favorable rate for construction. And, once I had the permit in hand, it was like, all right, well, let's start working.
No, I would imagine that all this was some upfront cost involved with the kit, the material, and also the construction. Did you use a financing option or was it a more private cash?
It was more of a cash on hand situation. So I'm been lucky, and I took a couple years and planned for this to be an eventuality. So with that, I knew I was going to need to spend some money. As always with a project, when you're working on things, I ended up spending more money than I thought I needed. I thought I was going to need to, because there were a bunch of things that I was trying to sort of not do. I was trying to not necessarily buy a truck, trailers, and all of those things. But now I own a truck and a trailer and directional drill machine, so I can actually bore underneath like driveways and roads all by myself. And there's lots of those little pieces, and they quickly add up. And so in total, I ended up, to get the whole thing up and running, I spent about $190,000 to get the whole thing started up and going, which is a significant investment. To me, that number isn't entirely scary, but it's a big number. It's a big number, and it's an investment not only in my current house, but in the community and the people who live around me as well. And so I'm very lucky they put their faith in me that I could get this done.
And now with the equipment you already have in hand and 41 customers connected, what are then the growth plans? And do you rent out the equipment, or do you provide it as a service? Like, okay, I'll teach you how you can do it on your own. What are your plans for this?
Yeah, so I've helped out a number of the other local, the small providers. I've provided, basically free consulting to them to say, this is how to do it. These are the tools. This is the equipment that I've used. Provide them recommendations, and they've gone out and they've bought many of those pieces of equipment to go and do things. I've recommended them to my distributor as well, who then is very happy to sell stuff to other people as well. And that's definitely worked out as well. I actually I bid on, my county has a broadband gap program. Okay. Where they're trying to expand broadband such that it's accessible to all of the residents in the area. And one of the things that I did is I recently bid on that, and I'm kind of waiting to hear what happens, because that would be build an additional 360 miles of fiber network.
Wow.
To service 3,500 additional homes or so that currently don't have broadband speeds available to them. The interesting thing is the difference between broadband and internet. Internet can be just any access at a very low speed, but broadband is this protected term in the US that has to do with 25, I think right now it's 25 down and 25 megabits down and 3 megabits up. Mm-hmm. This is why you'll see a lot of people advertise internet access and not broadband. Oh. And so like AT&T at my house, they're very happy to sell me internet access at 1.5 meg ADSL for about $50 a month. Whereas I sell 50 meg symmetric fiber for $65 a month to my customers. And with very few exceptions, pretty much everybody is actually, I don't even turn on the rate shapers for them, because I have so few customers and I have so much bandwidth available that I don't want anybody phoning me up and saying, hey, why is my service slow? It's actually easier for me to just throw the extra bandwidth away and keep my customers very happy.
Lucky customers, I would say. Lucky customers.
Yeah. It's a very customer-friendly environment because, like I said, I don't want them calling me.
Yeah, fair enough. Since it's only a side project or side hustle for you because you still have your main job, could you roughly estimate how much time you currently spend on this project?
Oh, all the hours dreaming, I go out, every time, my wife and my kids, sometimes I'll go for a drive, and, some people, they just go for a nice drive through the country, and I go drive down roads and I'm looking for, I see the cable TV line on the pole. I look and I see, there's a fiber marker. And I'll be like, hold on a minute. And I get out and I look at them. So, I've spent untold hours. I don't even know how to estimate how many hours I've spent doing that. For the big countywide project, the 360 miles that I proposed building, I drove over half of that just to look at it, to understand what was going on, because they gave me a map of which homes didn't have service. And so I wanted to go out and look and see, okay, how hard is it going to be to build this or do construction here? And some of the areas, one of the houses, they said, this house doesn't have service. And I look across the street and there's a cable TV amplifier right there. And I say, well, they may not subscribe to service, but it's available. It's right there. There's a lot of research you have to do in there because I don't necessarily want to go in and build broadband service to somebody where they have access right across the street already. I'd rather build it where people don't have access, charge them a fair price. I'm very transparent to people about what my costs are. I say, listen, it cost me $7.50 a foot to do the construction. And that's just in the labor. That doesn't count the materials. And this year, the materials have been going up in cost about 5% every month. Mm-hmm. And so I was very lucky in that for my project I'm building this year, I basically am doubling my original year build. I bought all the materials before all the prices went up. And I had a good enough relationship with my distributor that, he called me and he said, hey, prices are going up. Everything was quoted. He's like, do you want to buy today? And I'm like, sure, I'll buy today. It's been a very good experience doing a lot of this because I've built a good relationship with my distributor. He helps make sure I have what I need, and we've figured it all out. I've gotten to know all the local farmers in the area as well. They all want internet access. One of my customers, they have a beef farm. Okay. And they have 250 cows, and there's fiber to the cow. Because they have cameras there watching the pen so they can see what's going on with all the animals, because when it's calving season and the cows are having the babies, they don't want to get up, when it's 10 degrees Fahrenheit or, negative 10 centigrade and go out and check on them. It's a lot easier to just look on your phone screen and then roll over and go back to bed at 2 a.m. because as anybody knows, things never break at convenient times. And so, you don't want to find a cow in distress.
It's amazing what we can do with fiber, and that you enable everyone to have this privilege and to enjoy it and to actually focus on these areas where it's actually needed. And you mentioned the 3,500 households connected project where you're bidding for. Are you now up against the major ones, the tier ones, where you against the AT&T, Comcast, etc., or is it more on a local scale?
A little bit more local. So only four companies turned in proposals, of which I was one of. Okay. The other three were one was called MEC, which is a local provider here in Michigan. It's one of the electric cooperatives, and then there's a Charter and Comcast. And so I'm in an area where both Charter and Comcast have non-overlapping areas, but the entire county has service in different areas from different companies. And so I can see who turned in proposals. I can't see how much money they bid for it yet. So I'm still waiting to hear back if the project is going to be funded and going to be selected, because it was kind of a very open bidding process where they said, we have a preference for fiber, we have a preference for the local cost, and then the contracting rules actually have a preference for local companies as well. And since I'm a local company, I come into play with that, even though some of the other companies in the US, what we often have is we'll have, AT&T isn't just AT&T, you have AT&T Michigan. And so they say, oh, well, we're a Michigan-based company because it's Michigan division. And you have Comcast Michigan and Charter Michigan. And then all the companies roll up to the big company. It's kind of hard to see that. But I had a lot of fun writing the response to their proposal because I said, hi, this is what I do. This is my company. In the RFP, they wanted us to write down, please state the nature of your operations. Are they local? Are they national, et cetera? And I said, oh, our world headquarters and are located at this location. Even though it's a very serious proposal in trying to get broadband access and really get fiber to all these people who really need it. They don't necessarily need the service, but they need to have the option to subscribe to the service. It's that really option that's missing in the market. I had a lot of fun writing that, and I put some humor in there as well. because not everything doesn't have to be super serious, and you can have fun writing a response to a proposal.
Absolutely. Hope they see it the same way. So I'll definitely cross both of my fingers for you.
Oh, I'm very nervous. If I get it, that is going to be a very large project.
Yes, it's going to super scale your operation, super scale.
Yeah.
The other question I have you mentioned you don't use any wave shaper and customers get actually more than they pay for. So do you have like a 10 gig uplink or where are you currently at?
I have 2 10 gig uplinks right now, both to 2 local providers. One of the links goes back to a data center where I have co-location, and the Detroit Internet Exchange is actually there available as well. So I have a port on the Detroit Internet Exchange. So about almost 50% of my traffic comes in over that port, either from people like Amazon or Netflix, Akamai, who, full disclosure, is my day job employer, and the other CDN, other content networks associated there. But yeah, I have about half of my traffic that comes in there. And then including, like I said, I have got 41-ish, I think, direct customers. And then the wireless ISP, there's another 100 indirect customers that I have as well for end users there through him. So there's a fair number of people who are getting internet access as a result of this work that I've done.
Awesome. And if you now look back from your journey and what you have done to come to this point, what has been your biggest surprise in this process?
One of the biggest surprises is that if you go door to door and you have the conversation with people, there are people who are willing to pay a lot of money to get internet access. Mm-hmm. One of the people who I talked to, they were willing to pay $5,000, $1,000. I even had one person offer $100,000 to get internet access to their house. And people value things very differently. Some person will go out and say, oh, I'm going to buy myself like a Tesla or Clarion or something like that. Some people are like, no, like I see there's a need in my local community for this, and are willing, and we're lucky enough to have that money available to go do things. And so one of the things I'd say is don't be afraid to ask for a lot of money. I see a lot of people who basically scrape by asking for like, oh, well, it only costs me this, a minimal amount of money to go do things. Don't be afraid to ask for a lot of money if you're trying to go out and do this yourself, because you'll never know who will come along and say, oh yeah, sure, I'll give you $100,000 for service. If you don't tell them what it costs, and if you're not straightforward, you'll never get it.
Yeah. No, it definitely makes sense. And from the hardware itself, I think with your network engineering background, what are you using?
So I originally started off with some low-end Arista hardware. So I had bought a 7050 off of eBay, which is a Trident 1, Broadcom box. It does 8,000 routes in hardware, and it does 10 gig, 1 gig with very few buffers. I've since upgraded to Juniper 5100. And so I have 3 of those, so I can handle the BGP route scale, some BGP route scale to support my 2 transits and my connection to the Internet Exchange. And that really gives me a lot more options for what to do. And then I'm using the Ubiquiti has this OLT hardware. Yep. And so I'm using that as well. And that's relatively inexpensive. I actually just bought a spare, so I have a fully populated spare with all the optics and power supplies, just in case something happens. So I'm now at the point where I have most of the hardware to survive some sort of a failure if something were to happen for a long time. I can go and survive a little bit. So I still have the Arista. I still have a few people plugged into Ethernet, active Ethernet connections on there, because some of the original customers were on there. But everyone else is currently connected on PON, aside from those first about 10 people or so.
And all the equipment is still at your house, or have you rented now a little POP or small space?
So it's at my house with the exception of the colo facility. So I have got the EPL back to the co-location in Southfield, which is where I get one of the DIA connections and the connection to the Internet Exchange. So technically, I operate in multi. in multiple locations as a result of that, even though it's really just a tether back to those two connections. And then I have 2 friends who have colo with me right now as well. They had equipment. One of them is also now my backup smart hands person as well. So he can, if I'm out of town or somebody needs to go up there and do something, he now has access to get into the co-location facility. He's got the access cards and knows the combinations to everything.
Good to have someone like that.
Yeah. It's good to have somebody you trust to do that. I mean, one of the big things that I worry about is making sure that I'm documenting things well enough that there's a backup plan should something happen to me. I think many people have experienced a family member having medical issues and stuff, and you really want to have a lot of things documented and written down such that somebody else can come in and find information to do things. So I had a situation earlier this year where my wife has been having some medical challenges, and we were at the doctor's office, and there was a bad fiber splitter. In a PON network, you have these passive components, and it actually had a bad fiber splitter, but I wanted to go and redo one of the splices in the network, and I was able to look at a spreadsheet, look at the information, and ask one of my friends to go by with a fiber splicer and redo a splice and say, open up the splice enclosure at this location, redo only touch this one strand, go redo that strand. And there was originally a poor splice there because I had started off with a very old splicer, and now I have a much better one. And so this was a splice that needed to be redone anyways. And so I got a little bit of link margin back, but I wasn't getting how much back I really truly needed to be able to get. And then eventually, I think about a month and a half ago or so, I had this one splitter that I don't know what was wrong with it, but it was a 1x4 splitter, and two of them were bad. And so the light levels would fluctuate on them. Just for these, one of them really only had one customer out there, or one customer who would complain, and they'd be like, hey, it's down again. It would seem to always happen when it rained. And it's like, you troubleshooting it and being like, it's in a weatherproof splice enclosure, or something's not right. But I think the temperature difference or something when it rained must have caused inside of the buried enclosure as the ground temperature changed. I don't know what it was, but something, now that I replaced that splitter, everything's better.
Crazy.
I just knew I had to, it's one of those things I had to do.
You need to do more OTDR measurements, Jared.
Do OTDR, but you have to do it, when it's broken. Like most and look at them like, hey, you have great light levels. I don't know why it's fluctuating. There's 4 homes per mile along that stretch. So it's not a lot of people out there.
What kind of splitting ratio are you using?
So I'm using, for the most part, 1-to-4 splits when I do a split. And every once in a while, I'll cascade. So I might cascade them. I have one location where I have a 1x8 plus a 1x4.
Okay.
So as I go down the road, I end up doing things. I'm actually in the process of, I want to go back and retrofit everything and just change it to 1x4 splits, and then come back to the head end with a 1x8 splitter, actually in my head end location. So I just recently decided that that's what I'm going to do. That way it's a lot clearer what's going on, from a light level perspective, because I have one stretch where you go through 3 splitters to get out to 3 or 4 splitters to go out to the home. Because everybody is so close, it's okay from a light level perspective, because you have, you've got basically from about 7 dB to 27 dB that's acceptable. So you can go through like a 1x4 and then a 1x8 and then another 1x2 and still be okay.
At some point, you're reaching the limits of the specification of the ONT.
Yeah, most of the stuff launches at +4. And so you go +4, and then I often have the problem of the light is coming in too hot. So I have to go and add attenuators. And that's why I want to re-architect it and have it come in, go into the 1x8, because the 1x8 will essentially serve as that attenuator to go in and lighten it up, and then make sure that I have much better light numbers for all the customers.
Fair enough. So you can avoid this link flipping if it's right at the edge of the trigger point from the diode from the ONT. Makes sense. Good stuff, Jared. I like it a lot. So thank you so much for joining the session.
No problem. Happy we finally made it happen. For the for all of you listening, it took a couple of reschedulings to get the schedules right. So
Jared, with his side hobby of being a network provider, internet service provider, and also full-time network engineer, it's quite a busy man. But as I said earlier, Jared, I mean, you're one of the guys why I wanted to start the podcast to interview folks like you who actually help the community, bring more fiber, bring more broadband out there. So again, thank you so much to what you're doing, and fingers crossed that you get the contract to supersize your operation.
I'm not sure, and my wife isn't sure either. But I hope that the people get service who really need it. So yeah. I'm excited for the opportunity for them. But thank you for having me.
So last question: where can people find more about you and what you do? If I want to link them in the show notes.
I don't know. Google. I'd say there's there's the Ars Technica article that was done that took up like about a week of my time.
Really?
Yeah. The author kept telling me when it was going to be published, and it kind of moved a little bit, and I was kind of like, no problem, whatever. And then I think it moved forward a week from what he had told me. And so I woke up one morning and all of a sudden everything had blown up because it must have posted early in the morning. And I believe it was one of their feature articles on Ars Technica. And so it stayed there for a week because I think that's how their publishing works. And so it stayed there for a week. But I've put together a little bit of content. The company name is Wash, WASHFTTH.com is the website for that. I've put together a little bit of content. I should put links to it because I've actually put together like how to budget for something and how to estimate the costs. So if you do that /budgeting, there's some hidden content there on the website. So people should feel free to look at that.
All right, definitely. I will definitely link this in the show notes. So once again, thank you for your time, Jared.
No problem. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. Wow, Jared is quite the fiber-minded hero. Bringing fiber connection to his house, but also including his neighbor and his community during the process is quite the achievement. And all of this he did while working still as a senior network architect at Akamai. And it's also quite impressive that he used his own cash to do this build out and to deploy the network. And I must say, compared to Europe, getting started in America doesn't sound too complicated. I mean, getting the company registered, paying a lawyer to be registered as a telephone company, and then you can basically start doing your research, start the planning process, and go into the build-out phase. But as Jared mentioned, I think it's key that you do the research and that you talk to people in order to get more people on board to supplement your investment. Obviously, you're not going to get at every corner someone who's going to offer to pay you $100,000 if you can bring him fiber connection to his house. But every dollar helps in order to fund the project. So with that, thanks for listening to this episode of Become Fiberminded. If you enjoyed this episode, I would appreciate it if you could do me a quick favor and rate and review the podcast. And most importantly, if you learn something new, tell a friend or a colleague about the podcast so I can help more people. Be sure to go to fiberminded.com/episode 7. Once again, fiberminded.com/episode 7 to see the show notes with the links mentioned in this episode. And this will also include the secret budgeting content from Jared he mentioned earlier. I also enabled the comment function there, so make sure to leave a comment. And until next time, keep connecting the world with fiber.